Good morning. Are you ready for a challenging day? I heard one. I saw some smiles. Well, that is our hope, and that it's a day of renewal, a day of challenge for each and every one of us as we consider missions on this special Sunday. I'm going to invite you to stand with me as we sing together, Be a Missionary. The boys and girls that are in here are used to singing this with some clapping. And adults, you're not too old to do that as part of this song, you know. Let's make it a little bit fun while we do it too, as well as get challenged. Let's go, yes. Gotta have that excitement. Are we ready to do it? You want to do that one more time? It's our only chance to sing this morning. I think you're waking up. I see some smiles, some excitement. Let's do it one more time. Be a missionary every day. Tell the world that Jesus is the way. Live in the town or country or the busy avenue. Africa or Asia, the task is up to you. So be a missionary every day. Tell the world that Jesus is the way. The Lord is soon returning. There is no time to lose. So be a missionary, God's own emissary. Be a missionary today. Let's go. Let's go to the Lord in prayer, shall we? Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that you've given to us, that we can come into your house, and especially that we can consider missions today. Thank you for a song like this that reminds us that it's the task of every one of us to be about your business. You've challenged us to go into all the world and preach the gospel, and for some of us, it's right here in our own town, in our own county, in our own school, our workplace. And I just pray that today you would open our eyes to that challenge again, to that responsibility that you've given to us. For your example, no matter where you went, you were about your Father's business. And we thank you for that example. Help us to follow it. Pray that you would open our eyes, challenge us today as to what you would have us to do in response to the good news that you have given to us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Don't be seated yet. We got to say a memory verse, and we're going to do that all together. Some of you may not have been here, so if you got a bulletin, it is right at the bottom of that in blue in case you don't know it. Hopefully, many of us know it by memory, but it's maybe not real familiar because it's not straight King James either. So let's try our memory verse together, shall we? Matthew 28, 19a and 20. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Matthew 28, 19a and 20. Thank you. You may be seated. At this time, Al Graves is going to come and introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Don. Welcome to all, and it's good to be here myself. It's good to enjoy this Missions Sunday as we participate together with the McGinnis. I'd like to introduce them to you as John and Johnny, and they have a couple of the kids with them today, Lydia and JD. That's what I was told, so that's what I'm going with. But, we will start our conference at this time, and we'll have John come and share with us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Let me get this opened up here and going. I'm going to have all four of you guys, or three of you guys, come on up here. We said we had a couple of our kids. We'll talk about the other two in a few minutes here. They're still our kids, but they're no longer with us anymore. They're married. A lot has happened over the last several years. But this is my wife, Johnny. And you'll hear me call her Johnny or Johanna, either one. Her real name's Johanna, but she goes by Johnny. And then JD is our youngest, and then Ireland, or Lindy, is 15 and 14 is what they are now. So we had them do this when they were little. We're going to have them do it now, just because it's always interesting. I said I was never worried when they were little what their answers would be, because it was cute, and now they're old enough and they should know better, and it scares me to ask them. So I think we're on. Let's start with Ireland. We'll talk a little bit and fill you guys in on the kids here in a minute, but Ireland, we've been back here in the States for now over a year. We moved back just before the pandemic hit. What is one thing that you miss about Costa Rica? Now, they should know this. We've prepped a little bit. One thing you miss about Costa Rica, and one thing you're glad for or thankful for about here in the United States.
Well, I'm thankful that everybody understands me, so that way I can talk to you. It's great. And I'm also thankful that I can understand you back. It's simple, but it's still something that can change everything. And as for what I miss in Costa Rica, I miss being surrounded in mountains. It's been something where I look out and I'm like, it's very flat. Because I'm used to looking out, and at night there would be these lights all over the mountains. And it'd be really pretty.
I know, she stole yours. So, JD, what's one thing you miss, one thing you are thankful for?
So, in Costa Rica, I miss the beaches because it was really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And
what's one thing that you're excited to be back here for?
Friendships.
Yeah. There you go. All right, you guys have a seat.
You gonna make me do that too?
Yeah.
Oh, good gravy. Okay, so one thing I miss Spanish. It's hard, and it's taxing, and you have to gauge every word that you're going to say, which I like, because it keeps your mouth from saying things it shouldn't say, because you're regulating yourself. As you're speaking a foreign language, you regulate what you say, and I actually think that that's good for me, and so I miss Spanish. One thing that I love about the States, this year's been tough. But the thing that I think has been fantastic is there is now an understanding that kids have for missions kids. Most of them have done school from home now. They've had their mom as their teacher. They've not been able to go out and do busy life that the United States is most accustomed to. And that's what missions children do all the time. So there's now an understanding that as my kids go and talk to others, there's an understanding that they have now with kids here in the States that we didn't have until COVID. And so I know COVID has been rough, and I can talk about that too. But it's been a little bit of a sweet blessing for our family as we've come in right before COVID because of that reason.
So let me update you a little bit about life and our ministry and what's been going on. We'll spend the morning doing that. We were trying to think the last time we were back here to present, and it's been at least 3 years or more. And I believe, my wife had said, I believe it was an evening service that we were here. So it's been a good bit of time, and a lot has changed over the last several years. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jon Mc Ginnis. This is my wife, Johnny. We have been married now. This year will be 24 years that we have been married. I was an associate pastor at Berean Baptist Church in Portage, right down the road, for about 6 years. And in 2011, we moved to the country of Costa Rica. Living in Costa Rica, we lived there for about 9 years. We began our ministry working with a ministry called Tactica, which was a ministry that focused on the police and local authorities. God then moved that within about 2 years to focusing primarily with pastoral leadership and leadership development. And then the last almost 5 years now, we have been working with a ministry called Tri-M. Now you guys should be a little familiar with Tri-M, supporting the Howards and the Boyvers, and I believe Doug and Cheryl were just here recently. I am about 3 years ago they made me the director, so I drew the short straw on that one, and now I'm the director of Tri-M, and I'll share more about that and the traveling that we're doing with that. But we talk about us moving back here to the States. When I became the director several years ago, we knew that eventually I would have to move our family back to the United States. The way Tri-M works, and again, we'll share more a little bit later, but we go in and to foreign countries and we teach, give theological education, and we're in and out of countries all the time. And I was doing that from Costa Rica, and the last year we lived in Costa Rica, I traveled about 130 days out of the year. I was on the road, or in a plane, I should say, traveling and teaching. And though my wife and kids could do it just fine in Costa Rica, it's just a little bit better of a support system here in the United States for them when I leave, as well as every flight that I would have to go, I'd have to go from Costa Rica to the United States to Russia or to Ukraine, from Costa Rica to the United States to Africa or whatever, and it added about a $500-600 flight every single time I flew. So for, yeah, as well as 3 days of traveling. Because you figure there was at least a day or more traveling to the United States before you caught your next flight, and then sometime the next day you would go, and it just added when you think about 10 or 15 trips a year, that's a month extra you're adding to your travel time just by going to the United States and back. So we had talked with our sending church pastor and some others and got some counsel, and we decided that we would be moving back to the United States. Now, interestingly enough, our plan was to move back last May. And those of you may or may not know, we had a house in Mattawan, outside of Portage, and we were renting that house. And I came back and told the renters, hey, just so you know, we're not exactly sure when we're moving back home, but I can't own 2 homes. I'm not going to rent one and buy one. So eventually, we're going to have to make a decision here what to do. And the plan was for us to move back around May. I talked to them early in the fall, and by November, the house was empty. And as you can imagine, for us, that was a little taxing, paying for we rented a house in Costa Rica, paying for the rent down there, paying for our mortgage here. And we did the math, and we had ministry we had to wrap up in Costa Rica. So the soonest we could come back, we figured, was February of 2020. And we were a little frustrated with that because we wanted to kind of wrap up some more stuff in Costa Rica, and really we're pushing towards May, and we kind of went kicking and screaming. We came back in February. We were back here on Valentine's Day. We moved back to the States, and I actually was heading back to Costa Rica the following week for the first part of March, and I was supposed to be in Costa Rica for 1 whole month teaching to wrap up some more stuff. I made it through 1 week of teaching, and then this little virus called COVID hit the United States and got into Costa Rica, and things began to shut down systematically. So I made 1 week in Costa Rica of teaching out of my month. I moved back. I made it back to the United States, and then the whole world shut down. And we look back now, and our frustration of what God's timing and planning was we were very frustrated with that. But much like here in the States, but you can imagine even more so in Costa Rica, you weren't allowed to leave your home. You weren't allowed to get out and about. You couldn't get together. When we left in February, we sold pretty much everything we owned in Costa Rica and then came home. Had we waited to May, we never would have been able to sell anything because we couldn't talk to anybody. We wouldn't be able to, it would have been just a terrible mess. Plus, flying back with 18 bags and a family would have been pretty hard during COVID as well. So God is sovereign and in control and knows better than what we do. So he moved us back here in February, and we got home to get back integrated into church life, sort of, to get locked back down. But as my wife said, that was a blessing in one sense. It was an easy start for us to get back to the United States, an easy entry, as well as it's been a tool we've been able to use to explain what it's like to be a missionary. I mean, you all know what it's like now to leave your house, to run to the store, to grab your groceries, and then to come back home and really not have a lot of interaction with people because some are scared, some are not. Well, that's driving or flying into a foreign country and trying to go buy groceries when you don't know the language and you want to talk to them, but you really can't, and you're not sure what's going to happen. You go to the store, you say hi, and then you come home. And that was pretty much our life, a lot of it. So that it gives people an understanding a little bit better of missions. We're going to talk a little bit about family. We've had a lot of things happen over the last several years, but especially in the last year. I'll let my wife share the first one here because she was heavily involved in this one.
This is our oldest daughter, Katie. And Katie got married in July. She met Austin her sophomore year, or end of her freshman year of college. He's at Cedarville University. And they got engaged in December. And so the fun thing about Katie is she is probably my most determined daughter as far as education's concerned, but was not so as far as a wedding. And so we got down to maybe a week and a half before her wedding, and I went down. She lives in Cedarville, Ohio, and I went down to Cedarville and I said, "Okay, lady, what do you got done?" And she said, "Not very much." And so we spent that last week and a half just running around like chickens with our heads cut off. It was great. And so, but she and Austin, they still live in Cedarville at the moment. Austin is in the Marines. He will be commissioned here, supposed to be in the next couple weeks. He should start in October. So that will mean a move to Quantico. And she's finishing up her senior year at Cedarville. Right now, she is able to do that in town, and then she'll do it remotely once she's in Quantico. So that's Katie.
So, yeah, she did a lot. She did a ton that week. Now, the kicker to all that is what happened 6 weeks prior to that.
This is daughter number 2. This is Megan. She got married May 28th. She is my procrastinator, except when it comes to weddings. She moved in with us. She was living in Illinois with John's brother, my brother and sister-in-law, and was going to a community college there. And met Zach. We knew Zach. He was from the church that we attended at Berean in Portage. And so we knew his family pretty well. So this was kind of in the works for a little bit longer, a potential. And so I remember talking to Megan lots of times about Zach when she was a teenager. And so when we moved back to the States, he was in the area that we were in, and they kind of reconnected, and then had kind of a long distance with her in Illinois, and Zach was in Kalamazoo. So they had kind of a long distance relationship for several months, and then in October she moved back in with John and I, and they got engaged beginning of October, and that's when her wedding planning started. And so we planned and thought about and replanned and reconsidered colors. And I mean, it was a different kind of stress because it was non-ending. And so, but they got married in May, and everything was planned.
Yeah.
And then rain. Well, actually, it was that really, really cold weekend that we had. It was in the 40s.
40 degrees.
Do you remember that weekend?
For an outside wedding.
That was her weekend that she got married.
We didn't do it outside.
So then everything had to kind of readjust. And for the girl who had spent so long planning, that was difficult. But she handled it like a champ. And the pictures turned out great. The day was great. And that was just a fun day, too.
Yeah, so we've had, just the weddings themselves. We have 6 weeks of just mass chaos. Our house is finally emptied for the most part of wedding stuff, whether that be gifts, decorations, setup. It was just unbelievable. That pretty much consumed my wife's time.
Yeah, and the other thing that we decided to do, because we have had so many teams in our home, is we've decided that we could do the food. So we did the food for both the weddings. Let me tell you, that's a huge savings. It's not for everybody, but I'm so glad that we did. And it was great because we were able to feed everybody on a good budget.
Yes.
Because we had to budget. Because if you have 2 weddings within 6 weeks, you have to be very careful. And so they were both good about allowing me to be the one to make the food.
Yeah, we'll move on here, but I will say that my wife said that she wanted to do the food for everything. And I'm like, that's a lot. But she reminded me that we have a team of 15 people come down. They stay for 10 days. She feeds them breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Makes all that in advance before they get there. So it's basically making the same amount of food. So we did it. And parents of young ladies, if you need to talk about budgets later, you can. We did 2 very affordable weddings. So we'll fill you in a little bit on JD and Lindy, what's happening with them real quick right now, maybe a little bit with school.
Yeah, I would love to. So these are the 2 that are still under my roof. I'm so glad that the Lord gave me 4, because I can't imagine having launched 2 and then not having anything at home. Like, that would have been really tough. So the Lord knew that. So he gave me 2 more. And so these are the 2 that are still with us, that we still get to have an active everyday role in their lives. And so we talked about, when we moved back to the States, we had every intention of making a different education choice. And they were thrilled about that, and then COVID. And so I said, you know what, we've done homeschool for the last 9 years. I think that we can continue that. And so we made that decision to keep them at home last year. And so Lindy started Liberty Online, and she did extremely well. I did regular self-directed homeschooling with JD last year. And then this year we decided to put both of them online. So they're both with Liberty Online, which is going very well. We really like the program. And so I sit with them. It's not that I hands off school. I am very much involved in school. I just like that part. And so we sit at the dining room table every day together as they are doing school, and they can ask me questions. So I still try to be very active in their education. And so we do that. They're also involved in youth group. That's kind of the fun piece of coming back to the States, is being able to go to youth group. And so they are both in senior high this year, which is exciting because they get to be together. And so I know, look at each other like, I think it's exciting that they get to be together. So they're both active in being a part of youth group, and they both serve in children's ministry at our church. So they do that once a month. And so very active in doing things that typical States teenagers would do.
Good.
As well as the bad things.
Yeah, you can sit down. I want to share a little bit about what we do as a ministry with Tri-M, and specifically what we're doing in the area of pastoral training. My plan is during this hour right now to give you guys a good overview of what we are doing as a family, as well as what we do within the ministry. And then during the morning service and the evening services, we'll walk through a couple passages of scripture and really get into some more of a challenging time for everybody. Tri-M is the ministry that I direct and that we work with, and it stands for Mobile Modular Ministry. And the way that we like to explain it is mobile in that we don't go and build seminaries. necessarily. We go to, where everybody goes to that seminary, we like to go to them into their actual areas of ministry and location. So much of our modules that we teach are actually in a church somewhere, or a relatively central location where if they do have to travel, they will, but they'll gather there. We don't invest into buildings. We put our investment into people. Not that buildings are bad, but that we put our investments into really building into these people and try to resource them in that way. We have found, if you can imagine, with this pandemic, it has really shed some light, some goods and bads about what we do in life and ministry. And what I mean by that is it's hard to be mobile when you can't be mobile. Okay, so that's a frustration that God has taught us, and I'll continue to talk about that probably all morning and evening. It's probably the number one lesson God's taught me over this last year is how to handle frustration and disappointment as you are trying to get to where you need to go. But what it has also showed us is had we built buildings, had we owned property, had we done these things in a foreign country, it'd have been really hard to maintain those and sustain those during this pandemic, during this time when missionaries are forced to leave a country or so forth. So this gives us the opportunity to get in, to minister, and then to get out as well. And we can support our pastors that we work with in other ways, whether that be financially helping them from time to time or giving them resources as well. So we are mobile in the fact that we go to them. I try to get a variety here. Picture to the right is Costa Rica. Bottom picture is Ukraine. Top picture is in Rwanda, Africa. We're in a variety. We are in some of the cities. Majority of the places I'd say we are more out into the country. Our probably most remote area that we go to right now is in Nepal. And the missionary teacher that works there with us, it takes him about 3 to 4 days to get to where he's going to be teaching. And the first time he went, there was about an 8 or 9 hour trip on the back of a motorcycle. And after he couldn't walk for 2 days after that, he said he'll never do that again. So he takes a little bit longer and is able to get a car for that. It's modular in the classes that we teach. So again, maybe you're familiar with some distance education and that type of a model. We began this way back in 1992, 1991, but when modular education was not that popular. What we do is we teach for usually 3 days, 5 days, about a week-long class, and they usually have work to do before they get there. They take an intensive class that's usually from, let's say, 8 or 9 in the morning until 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. They do that for 3 to 5 days, and then they have homework afterwards. And we do it that way because it allows for pastors or people in ministry that have maybe are bivocational, which are the majority of the pastors around the world. It gives them the opportunity where they only have to take a short time off of work to be able to get their education, and then they can go back into their areas of ministry. So we try to be flexible in allowing them to get in and get as many classes as possible. The ministry is really, the third M is our target audience. And by that I mean we are focusing on men and leaders who are involved in ministry, currently have a ministry. We talk about the vast amount of pastors that do not have any sort of theological education, but they do have a church that they are supposed to be shepherding. And how hard that is for them to be able to preach and to teach weekly and to counsel, having had zero training at all whatsoever. So we want to give those resources and give this opportunity for those type of guys to take classes, to be able to apply it to their everyday lives, and to be able to grow in their own professional development as pastors. So where are we as a ministry? We are in about 21 countries around the world. I say about because they come and they go, and sometimes countries, especially right now, are open or closed and so forth. But you can see them up there listed. And we are in and out. Some of them are formal modules. We do a 24 course load. I'd say on probably 3/4 of those, they go through that cycle. And then a handful of them, it's a little bit more flexible to fit the needs of what the pastors are dealing with in their particular country. For example, we are in Ukraine right now, and we are opening a new area in Ukraine, and they are going to go through the full 3 to 4 year cycle of 24 classes. We are also in a Bible college in Ukraine. It was a contact from a friend, and we teach 2 or 3 classes there a year, just providing them classes on missions, on the doctrine of the church, and administration in the church. These are classes that we would teach at a different level, maybe for some of these other leaders. Triumph is built around, and we'll look at this tonight. We'll study this passage tonight, and then a few more verses with that. 2 Timothy 2:2. And what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And using that model, we have entered into an area, and we want to train and equip pastors. And the idea is that we don't want to build a dependency upon ourselves. We want to get in there and be able to teach and train them in such a way that they will then be able to reproduce that and teach and train other pastors in their area. And we have seen that with great success throughout the world, throughout our different modules that we teach, and the motivation that they have. Many a times they'll start their own thing. I think Doug was here again a few weeks ago, and Doug and Cheryl. Doug's really worked on that and turned a lot of these modules over to the pastors in Mongolia and in Tanzania and other areas as well. And they're continuing to go. Russia is another good example. Romania, another country that we served in, where now they have their own Bible institutes of some kind that they go and they teach. Now, when we do that, it looks very different than what we would do. And you have to be okay with that. We don't want to micromanage how they do. We get them through their classes. We want to be a resource and a help to them, but it will look like their own flavor, their own style of how they do things. And that's part of releasing. Many times if you've raised kids, you realize, you train them in one direction, and here's where you're going. And as Proverbs tells us, that they will more than likely head that direction, but it always looks a little bit different. And that's kind of how it is in discipleship. As you work with pastors, they have a tendency to take their own little style of things. So what have we been doing in the past several years? In 2019, we had, and I just listed some, we've had more than just these, but in 2019, there were some major events that happened here. We were able to cover modules in Costa Rica. Now, one question you guys may have is, I thought you guys were missionaries in Costa Rica. And the answer is, yes, we are. I do teach modules there, and as I do our teaching in Costa Rica, I have 2 locations, and I teach at least 3, sometimes 4 times a year. I will be going down, it looks like it's going to be in November. I'll be going down teaching in November. I'm planning on going back again in January. I will go back again in April, and then possibly one in the summer months. That's the flexible date, if it fits in within the schedules. I was able to go to a particular country in the Mediterranean that we were working with. And this is a newer country that was opened up that year in 2019. And this country was, it's 99.9% Muslim, and just an incredible opportunity that God opened, again, through a contact, a friend of a friend who said, hey, why don't you come and just introduce you guys yourselves and maybe do a 1-day intensive trial module, and we'll see what happens. And now every year we go back there and teach about 3 times a year. We have 2 different locations right now that we are teaching in to those pastors. Just an absolutely incredible opportunity, and God is doing great things in that country. Let me share about that. Again, a positive part of the pandemic. This is I stood in this church in this particular country, and I was preaching on Sunday morning, and we had maybe 25 or 30 people going. The capital city has 80 million, I believe. No, 80,000. 80,000 people in the capital city. There is 8,000 believers in the entire country. So in the entire country, it only has 8,000 believers. In the particular capital city that I was at, there's less than 1,000 believers in that capital city. I had 23, 24, 25 or so in that church service. And it was just a blessing, because they obviously take their Christianity very, very serious there. They figure if you don't go to church, you're not a Christian. Now, they don't say that. They don't feel that, church saves you. But there's such persecution on the church in this particular country, they say that if you're not willing to make a stand, then I'm not sure you know what it means to be a follower of Christ, which is pretty intense. When the pandemic hit, the whole world shut down, and they too had to close their doors, and they had to move to online. So for several months, they moved to online. The first week they moved online, they had 100 different, devices log on to be able to watch the service. And the services were in their particular language. It wasn't in English. So it wasn't mom and dad, clicking on to see the missionaries or workers there and to be able to check in on them. We had 100. There was 100 that logged in. The following week, there was 1,700 that logged in. And for several weeks, there were well over 1,000 to 2,000 people logging in to watch these services where the gospel was proclaimed for several weeks in a row until they were open their doors again. So we look at this, and yes, it's been rough. Yes, the pandemic's been hard. But man, the opportunities that opened up because of that was absolutely incredible. I was able to go to, I believe you guys support Rich and Rochelle Howard with Triumph as well. And I was able to visit in 2019 with them down in Rwanda and see the ministry that they had going on down there. And just an incredible blessing to see and to meet their pastors, to be in a small little building with about 60 Rwandan pastors. At that time, I taught through the prophets, and just a really great opportunity. It was my first time actually going over to Africa, so it was a really very unique opportunity. The interesting thing about Rwanda is Rwanda was just like Costa Rica. Same food, same fruits and vegetables, same climate. You walk out the door, there's a volcano there. Costa Rica, you walk out the door, there's a volcano right there. I mean, it was just absolutely amazing. They're almost at the same line, the latitude or longitudinal line. They're almost at the same line there. And much of the fruits and vegetables that were brought over, that we have in Costa Rica, were brought over from Africa and probably from that region. So it was very interesting to be in a different area that still reminded me of, at that time, what was home to us. In 2020, as I told you, we moved back to the United States. In February, by God's divine sovereign hand, we moved back, not because of our choice. And then I was able to do one module in 2020 in Costa Rica. And that was a challenge even doing that during the initial parts of the pandemic. I attempted modules in Cameroon, in Mongolia, and in Central Asia, the country that we're looking at opening right now. All these were potential. All of these I had gone through the process of the applying for the visas. It looked like I was going to get it, only to have a surge in COVID, and the country shut down, and the visas were not granted. So 2020 was a hard year for everyone, and for us and our ministry in particular. I'm kind of tired of filling out visa applications when you know you're probably just not going to get it. But we do it anyways, and God is gracious. In 2021, we were able to hold 2 modules in Costa Rica during 2021, which was a blessing. We actually graduated one of our locations there. They had gone through all the full 3.5-year cycle, so it was great to see that go through. And then we also opened up the country of Belarus. So if you know where Belarus is kind of north of Ukraine, south of Russia. And the Belarusian people are just hungry and ready for training. In the past, Belarus has been very closed and restricted, and you had to have visas and everything to get in. And a couple years ago, the president wants to open it up, make it a little bit more Western and a little bit more of a touristy area. So he decides to allow U.S. citizens to go in just under a passport. So that kind of took that whole hoop that we had to jump through out, and we immediately got tickets, and within just a few months, we were in there able to meet with the Baptist Union. They have an education system, the way their churches work, where I was meeting with about 14 men to walking through Triumph and what we do to get approved. And once that was approved, now we're able to start our modules. We'll be doing, actually at the end of October, it looks like I'll be heading back there in Belarus to begin our very first module in that country. And we'll do that probably 2 or 3 times a year is what it looks like. Future plans. I will say, just put a little, I should make this like italicized or question marks beside them, because one thing we've learned is that God's the one that directs the future. We do not. And we want to make our plans, but we also realize that God is in control of that. September, I have a module in Ukraine or in India. Lord willing, the answer to that is India. I got an email yesterday morning that said my business visa was approved, and all I had to do was then now physically mail in all my stuff, overnight it to the Indian consulate. They would then overnight it back to me. So Lord willing, by Tuesday or Wednesday, I should have my Indian visa in hand, and I board a plane on Friday to go to India, and I'll be there for about 2.5 weeks teaching the book of Romans. So I'm excited about that and about that opportunity. Every chance I get, and we get to travel and to teach, to do what we are to be doing, we're super excited about. So I'm very thankful for that. If by some chance that door gets closed, then the following Monday, there is a need to teach in Ukraine as well. So I'll be buying a ticket and going to Ukraine the following Monday if for some reason that doesn't get to me in time. So we're leaving all that in God's hands. Now I feel like I'm really kind of doubling up. We really want to make sure that we can get to where we need to be going and teaching. In October, my original plan was to go to Costa Rica. As of last night, that plan changed, and it looks like we'll be going to Costa Rica in November, because what is not up here is at the end of October, I will be traveling to Belarus to teach that module as well. So I was going to change it this morning, but I decided not to show you this is how quickly things change for us. I made this slide yesterday afternoon. By last night, everything changed on this plan. And if you can imagine buying plane tickets and visas and everything that goes with those details and have things change like that, that takes the majority of my time right now, is continuing to work through this process. So the idea would be Costa Rica would be the first part of November, and then we have missionaries that look like they will be moving for 3 or 4 months to the Mediterranean, and my wife and I will be traveling over with them to help them get situated and settled. Should be happening in November. In 2022, we have trips relatively planned, 3 times in Costa Rica. Lord willing, we'll be able to go into Central Asia, and we'd like to do a preview trip and maybe a first module if God opened that door for us within the 2022 year. We will be, in April, I know I'll be teaching in Ukraine. God's opened up doors to teaching in Russia and in Belarus. I would like to get back to Cameroon. As you remember from 2019, that was canceled. So I want to get back into Cameroon with one of our team members as well. And it looks like I'll be taking a trip into Nepal. So all this to say, this is what we do. We go in, we teach, and then we get out of these countries. Each of our Triad missionary travels on average in a normal year, travels on average 125 to 150 days out of the year, which is hard, as you can imagine. I mean, it's hard on a family, it's hard on wife and kids, and we do that, but we don't. It's not like for my family. It's not like I'm gone for a month or 2 months. I'll go for 2-week trips. I'm home. I'll go for a week. I'm home. I'll go for pockets of time, and we try to balance that out as much as possible. We do what we can, and we try to be very. My Sydney church pastor is very gracious and helpful in helping me balance out my time as well. So that's very needed for us to balance out as well. I want to share just briefly, what time do I need to be done here? Done? 10:45. Okay, good. I want to share briefly about Central Asia. We're not able to share exactly right now where that particular country is with you. If you want to talk to me later, I can of course let you know in that scenario. But just for safety and security, because things are posted on the internet, we don't want to say this out loud. But the particular country that we are looking at going into here, and that God's opened doors, is located within the 1040 window. It's probably one of the countries that you're probably thinking through is what it could be. And it's I would say relatively in the past has been very hostile to the gospel and to Christianity. There were missionaries and Christian workers in there for years that were all kicked out several years ago. And this is a landmass of, I have 172,000 square feet. That's about the size of California. So the size of the country is about the size of California. And it's a deserty area with long, hot summers, and that's important to bring up because as you plan your modules, my original trial module was supposed to be in one of their summer months. And my contact, he goes, you don't want to come here during that month. I'm like, well, it's what I have open. He's like, nothing really happens during that month. It's in the 120s. I mean, it's 115s. It's just really, really hot. He's like, you won't see anybody probably. So I'm like, all right, well, we will adjust that. Population, about 30 million people. You see, it's 88% Muslim, it's 9% Eastern Orthodox, and 3% other. And other is evangelical as well as other stuff in there. So it's not a highly evangelized country that we would be heading into. It's interesting the way God opened that door. And I want to share briefly, one of the questions we're always asked is, well, how do you decide where you're going to go? How do you decide what country you're going to go into? And you know, the cliche answer, and it's not, but the cliche answer is that God opens doors and we walk through them. But the reality of it is that's exactly what happens. God opens a door and we say, you know what, a friend of a friend who knows a pastor, maybe you should give him a call, and we do so. And that just leads on to the next contact, I was reading an article, and it wasn't the Wall Street Journal, it was one of those magazines. I was reading an article about this particular country, knowing that we had been in there and then had been kicked out. And their president, again, with the main decision to finally begin to westernize this particular country, has decided to open its borders and to be a little bit more, I would use the word friendly, to tourism and to people traveling in and out and through their country. So I remember talking to one of our team members thinking, you know, this is not the climate that it used to be up until a year ago. It was not that climate. It was very antagonistic, especially for Americans. It was very hard. I'm like, maybe we should start thinking about entering into this country again. I got in contact with one of our former students in that country who was really excited about the opportunity for us to enter in there and to begin teaching. One thing led to another, and next thing you know is I had my plane tickets bought, my first visa applied for, which, of course, because of COVID, eventually got rejected. But it looks like, Lord willing, I mean, he's just waiting. He's a bivocational pastor who is ready to drop everything at a moment's notice to be able to translate for the week of modules and to be able to give us the opportunity to open up teaching in that particular country. So the plan would be to go in there and would be able to do, the first trip would be a survey trip. And really that's for my peace of mind to know how hostile an environment is this or is this not going into, and how free can you be to share, and how all of that aspect of life and ministry there. After the preview trip, then we would end up beginning our first module. So my goal would be in 2022, first of the year, to be able to get into the country for the preview trip, and then eventually begin modules there in the spring or the fall of that same year. I want to open it up now, just give you guys a few questions. We've got about 10 minutes here. I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask some questions about life, ministry. You can ask it to my wife, to my kids. Just give you guys the opportunity for that before we close this thing down.
Once your kids are gone, will your wife travel? Is there a ministry for her?
Yeah.
In what you do? I know you address mostly pastors.
Yep.
That are men, but is there a place where a woman's role is?
Yeah. And it's interesting. Our Triumph missionaries right now, we have 7 individual family units, as well as 3 or 4 that are retired that continue to travel and to teach. Everyone does it differently. Everyone's different. We have Doug and Cheryl. Cheryl would travel, I'd say, at least about half the time or more, and she would actually be able to teach some from time to time. There are others, Rich and Rochelle. Rochelle would teach with Rich as well. Other spouses don't travel at all. I know that the plan is for my wife to travel when I go to Costa Rica. She'll come down with me on those because of the contacts and connections that we have. She's going with me into the Mediterranean as well. To answer your question, once the kids are all out, which for our family used to be hard to believe, now it's not, in about 4 years, our youngest will JD will either be in the military or in college. And those are our two options, by the way, military and college. That's about the only options we give them. Once we're on our own, my guess is yes, my wife will be traveling with me a good chunk of it. Yeah, most pastors have wives. Most pastors have wives, and yeah, exactly. And I would say that I don't mean to say that flippantly. The reality of it is whether they actually have a course for them, or whether it's just connecting and rubbing shoulders with them. One thing I should have shared is my wife lived a year in Russia. My father-in-law, who is also with Triumph, he's also he always introduces me as his boss, which is kind of a joke. So my wife lived a year with them in Russia. She knows a little bit of Russian. She knew a lot several years ago. And I'm chomping at the bit to get her back into that culture. And right now, it's just hard to do with the kids. And that's just the reality of it is, and we realize that. Having gone through youth ministry and pastoral ministry, we realize there are seasons within your life that you just have to make choices. And right now, it's important for her to be as much as possible with our kids while we're traveling. But when she is not, or when we do not have kids, then she'll be with me for a good chunk of it. There's also a cost effectiveness in there. We have to think through because everything doubles when you add people to your team, and sometimes it's certainly worth that. And sometimes if it's just an in and out trip, she wouldn't do that. My trip to Belarus was 3 days. I literally flew there, got a COVID test when I landed, went to a meeting for a day, got a COVID test again, and then flew right back to the United States. It was just an in and out, super quick meeting. So that's a really, really good question, though. Yeah.
What are your strategies for connecting with indigenous pastors, especially in a new area,
Yeah.
closed country where you don't have
Yeah.
communication?
Let me go a little deeper than that. Having lived 9 years in Costa Rica and learned Spanish, I realize how hard it is, or how easy it is, I should say, to mess up translation. So, when I would teach or preach or teach in Spanish, or even if I did it in English and had a Costa Rican translate it for me in Spanish, I know what he's saying. So I know when he's wrong. And I'm able to correct that and tweak that. So I say that to say, what's most important for us when we enter into a country is to make sure we have a very reliable translator. Someone who is a believer, and someone who understands English well enough that you can present, you can share even complex theological type stuff in the native language and know that what they're saying is true and is correct. So how do we do that? At this point in the game, a lot of our former students are easy ones to work with. So a lot of our translators, a lot of our contacts into new countries are from former students who we had. So we got into Belarus. The way we got into Belarus was from a former student who was in Ukraine taking classes for us, lives in Belarus. He made the connection with his home church with a translator who was just phenomenal, a really super great translator. And we were able to get into that country through that former student. And I would say the majority of our countries that we go to, the majority of the contacts come from former students who have taken our classes. Now, prior to that, God just opens doors. And we learn the hard way, and you get involved, and you're like, this is not the way we should be doing this, and you make your course corrections and adjustments. But we have been established well enough now that I think God continues to feed us through former students. Any other questions? This is the main time to ask this question, so I just want to give you this. Yes, ma'am.
What church do you attend here in the United States?
We go to Berean Baptist Church, where I was on staff in Kalamazoo and Portage. Yeah. It's right off there, off of 131 as you're heading down south from 131-94. I was on staff there. I was youth pastor for several years and then transitioned over to Christian education pastor. And that has been just a blessing. I have a great relationship with Bill Abernathy, our pastor. They laughed during COVID. I was the designated survivor, is what they called me, because I was the one who didn't have an office in the church. I actually could have. They offered me one, and I said, no, I'll keep it at home. But that way, if COVID hit the pastoral staff, they'd all have to quarantine, and then I'd be on to preach on Sunday. So that only happened one time, but it did. I was able to fill in for our youth pastor who was who was supposed to preach and ended up catching COVID. So we've been able to be heavily involved in that. The kids work in children's ministries. My wife does as well as an alternate, as well as has led ladies' Bible studies. It's kind of frustrating, but I love it. I fill in for teaching. Now, we have a Sunday school class that we love dearly. They're younger, married. Their kids are pretty little kids. And we jump into that class with them because we love that age group especially, and working with these young parents. But for the last 2 months, I've taught at a different class in our church every Sunday because of COVID and so forth. We've been able to jump in and jump around. So, yeah. Any questions? Last one. Last two. We'll let you go.
You're starting to run into requirements that we're seeing here in the States, like have to show the card that you've been vaccinated, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, COVID's a real pain in the neck right now. Let me give you an example, and I'm going to mess this up because I still have to reread. For me to get into India, now I've had COVID, and I got the vaccine, and I did so primarily because they're going to require it eventually here to enter into certain countries. So I have the card. I've had COVID. I have to have the PCR test before I leave. I have to fill out, just by flying into France, I have to fill out 2 different forms and download an app just to fly through France. I get into India and will have to have a tracking app put on my phone, which is less than desirable. But we will do that to do the ministry if we need to. Then to do it all again, to fly back through France, to then fly back to the United States, having your PCR test done in India, just to get back into the country. And that's what it is today. That's the other issue. Countries require this. Now, I can get into Ukraine, I just found out, with your vaccine card. It's all you need to show them and you're done today. So again, I'll talk a little bit later, morning or evening, I forget, walking through what do we do. Half of what I do, or not half, but a good chunk of what I do is I continue to follow up on the different countries we're in, what are the requirements to get in and out, and just those details. I mean, it's confusing on a normal day. It's a little bit more confusing right now, but yeah.
Do you still have any interaction with Tactica?
We do, not a ton. When we were in Costa Rica, believe it or not, we actually did not. They lived about a half mile away from us, Ryan and Gretchen did, and the ministry center was a half mile away from us, but they ran in these circles and we ran in these circles. Ryan and Gretchen are still members at Berean. We still see them at church and run into their kids, probably more than them right now. But yeah. Yes, sir.
How many, I would say, employees, but I'm going to use that for better, would be under the Tri-M? I'm trying to get
Yeah.
an idea of the size. Do you have 100 people? No. 5,000?
No. So of actual missionary units, we have 7 families that travel to these 21 different countries. We have 4 that are retired, and 3 of the 4 that are, we use the words actively retired, in that, or I use those words, in that my father-in-law is 74 years old. He's been retired for the last, I think, 3 or 4 years. He's going to Ukraine next week. I'm traveling to Ukraine with him again in April. He travels with me to Costa Rica in January. So even our active retired guys are traveling 3, 4, 5 trips a year. Now, with each of us, there are guys that are on the ground, nationals, that we partner with. So in Costa Rica, I primarily work with a pastor named Esteban Mora, and he's my main guy in Costa Rica. In Ukraine, it's another guy. In Russia, it's another guy. So they're not employees, but they're people who we partner with. So I would say if you count those, we're probably about 20-something total. But as for the organization Triumph itself, we have 7 active and 4 that are retired. Okay, let me, if you don't mind, let me close our time in a word of prayer, and then we'll get ready to transition to the morning service. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity to look in your word in just a few minutes here, Lord, and to study and to be challenged, Lord. I pray, as you think of missions and what you're doing around the world, I pray, Lord, that you would help us to be motivated, to be encouraged, and to be in prayer for those who are serving you all over the globe. Thank you for this church and for their faithfulness. And I pray, Lord, you protect us over the next several weeks and months ahead. I ask all this in your name. Amen.